The shadow fell across the marina before anyone understood what was casting it. One moment, the Port Meridian Yacht Club was exactly what it had been for the previous 3 hours, a floating celebration of wealth and self-congratulation. 200 guests in summer linen and designer silk standing on the club's main dock, with their champagne flutes catching the afternoon light, the harbor glittering, the hired jazz quartet playing something tasteful near the bar, the enormous banner reading Oliver and Vivian, engaged, stretched between two polished columns above the water. The next moment, the light changed. It changed the way light changes when something very large moves between the sun and the earth. The shadow came from the south, across the open harbor, and it arrived faster than something that size had any right to move. People near the water's edge noticed first. They turned. Several put their hands above their eyes and looked out toward the open sea, squinting against the angle of the afternoon sun. What was coming into the harbor of Port Meridian, escorted by 2 smaller naval vessels flying the flag of Sorvain on their bows, was the Royal Sovereign Yacht Aldrich, the state vessel of the Kingdom of Sorvain, commissioned 12 years ago at a cost that had never been published, measuring 142 meters from bow to stern, painted in the navy blue and gold of the Sorvain Royal House, with the sovereign crest embossed on the hull in lettering 4 feet tall. 2 additional security vessels flanked the approach. On the dock at the water's edge, 6 men in the dark uniforms of the Sorvain Royal Protection Service had appeared. No one had seen them arrive, which was the point, and were quietly establishing a perimeter. Oliver Ashworth stood at the center of his own engagement party, holding a glass of Laurent Perrier Rosé and watching the shadow arrive, and his face performed, in rapid sequence, the expressions of confusion, recognition, and something that was beginning to resemble fear. What would you do if you had spent 3 years systematically diminishing the woman you were married to? If you had called her dull and graceless and asked her in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning in February whether she was actually going to cry over the divorce papers or whether she would do everyone the favor of being sensible about it? What would you do if 11 weeks later the shadow of a 142-meter royal yacht fell across your engagement party? What would you do if the gangway descended and the woman you had called boring, provincial, and financially invisible appeared at the top of it wearing a diamond and sapphire parure that any museum curator would have identified as the Sorvain crown jewels? What would you do if the man beside her was her father? What would you do if you knew, from the expression on his face, that he had been waiting for this specific moment for 5 years, with the patience of a man who understood that the most complete justice always arrives in its own time? The shadow was still spreading. The band had stopped playing. 200 guests had turned to look at the harbor, and Oliver Ashworth, who had spent considerable energy over the past 5 years ensuring that the woman he married understood her place, was beginning to understand something about his own. Let me take you back. Let me take you to the place where this started, because the starting place is where I made the choices that made this ending possible, and those choices deserve to be understood. My name is Eleonora Margot Sorvain. I am the only daughter of His Majesty King Edward III of Sorvain, a constitutional monarchy on the northern coast of Europe with a population of 8.4 million people and a sovereign wealth fund that has been accumulating through careful management across 7 generations to a current value of approximately 290 billion euros. I hold the title Her Royal Highness Crown Princess of Sorvain, and I have held it since birth, and I will hold it until the day I am crowned queen, which my constitutional advisors expect to occur within the decade as my father advances in age. I was prepared for that role from the moment I could understand what preparation meant. I learned 6 languages. I studied constitutional law, international relations, and economic policy at the University of Edinburgh under a light security arrangement that my father considered insufficient and I considered barely manageable. I did 2 years of postgraduate work in archival science, a genuine interest of mine, not a constructed one, which later became professionally useful in ways I had not anticipated. I sat on the advisory board of 3 Sorvain cultural foundations. I attended state functions in 4 countries before I was 25, and I had never, at any point in my public life, been in a relationship that was not shaped by what I represented rather than who I was. At 28, I had reached a conclusion that I stated to my father one evening in the private sitting room of the Sorvain Palace, where we had the conversations that did not require protocol. I said, "I am going to disappear for a while." He said, "Define while." I said, "Long enough to find out if it is possible." He was quiet for a moment. He set down his glass. He looked at me with the expression he uses when he is deciding whether to argue or to accept that the argument is already lost. "What exactly are you trying to find out?" "Whether someone can love me," I said, "without knowing what I am." He looked at me for a long time. "And if no one can? Then I will come home with better information than I currently have," I said. He said, "You are exactly like your mother." I said, "I know." He said, "Your mother was correct about most things." I said, "I know that too." He accepted it. He arranged it, with the help of his most trusted security advisor, with the care and thoroughness that my father applied to everything. An identity. Ellie Marsh, British national, archival researcher, employed at a small private conservation institute in London, a flat in Islington. A security detail so invisible, it was effectively theoretical. A communication protocol. A promise that I would check in every 2 weeks and that the communication would stop if he had not heard from me in 72 hours. I moved to London in September. The flat was on the 2nd floor of a Victorian terrace on a quiet street in Islington, with high ceilings and old floors and the smell of old books that I associated with good work. I worked at the Institute of Private Archives in Clerkenwell, a genuine institution, small and well-regarded, where I cataloged correspondence, managed acquisition processes, and did the careful, unhurried work of ensuring that things that mattered were not lost. It was real work. I was good at it. I was also, for the first time in my adult life, reliably unrecognized. I walked to work. I bought groceries. I cooked meals in the small kitchen on a schedule I set myself. I wore clothes that were appropriate for a woman on a conservator's salary. Quality items, but unbranded, practical, the kind of thing that communicated competence without statement. I was invisible in the specific way that only available to people who have spent their entire lives being visible, and I found it extraordinary. I met Oliver Ashworth 7 months into my time in London. He was referred to the Institute by a solicitor's firm that needed help authenticating a collection of Victorian correspondence for an estate matter. Oliver was the executor of the estate and came in to discuss the project in person. He was 37, a commercial real estate developer with a firm that bore his father's name and had been in the family for 30 years. He was tall, well-dressed without being ostentatious, and he had the specific energy of someone who was accomplished but still working, still oriented toward what he was building rather than resting on what had already been built. He asked intelligent questions about the authentication process. He stayed longer than the meeting required because the work was genuinely interesting, and he seemed to understand that. When he left, he asked if I would have coffee with him sometime and answer more of his questions. I said yes. The coffee became a habit. The habit became something else. Oliver, in those first months, was warm in ways that surprised me. He was curious about my work and about me, and the curiosity seemed genuine. He asked about what drew me to archives, about what it felt like to handle something that had survived centuries, about whether I thought old things carried some quality of the time they came from, or whether that was romantic projection. He was thoughtful. He was funny in the dry way of people who observe carefully. He cooked dinner for me, badly the first time, and with improvement, because he decided it was a skill worth developing. He talked about his family with the honest ambivalence of someone who has been shaped by people they love and are not entirely in agreement with. His father had built the company and was now retired and had opinions about how it should be run that Oliver was navigating with the patience of someone who understood that the opinions came from love even when they were wrong. His mother was formidable and social and had a vision of what Oliver's life should look like that Oliver discussed with affectionate exasperation. He proposed at 14 months. We were in his flat a Saturday morning, and he did it without staging. He simply said, over coffee, that he had been thinking about what he wanted the rest of his life to look like, and that the answer consistently included me, and would I marry him? The ring was a small oval diamond, simple and correct. I said yes. We were married 4 months later, a small ceremony. My father attended under his cover identity, a retired civil servant from continental Europe, a quiet man who sat at the back of the register office and shook Oliver's hand afterward with the grip of someone who was measuring character with a tool finer than most people had access to. Oliver did not notice. He was not the kind of person who paid close attention to the men standing quietly at the back of rooms. The first year of marriage was the year I had hoped for. We built a life. The flat in Islington became ours in the way that spaces become yours when you inhabit them together. I kept working at the Institute. Oliver's company continued to grow. We argued about small things and resolved them. We made decisions together. I felt something I can only describe as ordinary, and ordinary felt like the most extraordinary thing I had ever experienced. The second year was when things began to change. Oliver's company secured a significant development contract, a mixed-use scheme in the city, the kind of project that required relationships with investors and city councilors and press contacts and the broader machinery of the commercial property world. With the contract came a new social landscape, dinners with investors, events at private members' clubs, the specific, stratified world of London commercial real estate where people were assessed continuously by who they knew and how they dressed and what they owned. In this world, Ellie Marsh, archival conservator, modest flat, no family to speak of, was a liability. Not immediately, not dramatically, but incrementally, in the way that becomes visible only when you have been watching for it. His mother was first. Patricia Ashworth was 63 years old and had been the wife of a property developer for 38 years and had absorbed, through proximity and determination, every code and convention of the world her husband had built their lives in. She wore Chanel with the commitment of someone who had decided it was a uniform. She had opinions about neighborhoods, about schools, about the correct way to present oneself at events where the correct way was a form of currency. She met me at a Sunday lunch at the Ashworth family house in Surrey, 6 months after the wedding. She was polite in the way of women who have excellent manners and deploy them as a form of distance. She asked about my work. I told her. She asked about my family. I told her they were not close. She said, "How sad," and moved the conversation to a topic that suited her better. Over the following year, Patricia's politeness sharpened at its edges. She made comments about my clothes, always framed as helpful suggestion, always timed for maximum visibility. She mentioned, at a dinner where Oliver's business partners were present, that she was sure I would find my footing socially once I had more experience of the right circles. She said the right circles the way you say a foreign language phrase you have not quite mastered. Oliver's colleague, Darcy Pemberton, was the sharper edge. Darcy was 34, an investment director at one of Oliver's major backers, and she had been to school with Oliver and had wanted, for most of the years since, to be in the position I now occupied. She was beautiful in the maintained, aggressive way of someone who considers beauty a competitive advantage and maintains it accordingly. She wore things that cost significant amounts of money in ways that ensured you knew it. She called me Ellie with a warmth that did not reach her eyes and found ways, at every event, to reference things about her own life that made mine look unformed by comparison. She mentioned, at a dinner in the 3rd year of our marriage, that it was so sweet that I had kept working at my little archive job even after Oliver's company had become successful. She said this in front of 7 people. Oliver said nothing. He started saying nothing more frequently as the years passed. Not in private. In private, he was still capable of warmth. But in public, when the comments came, when Darcy made her pointed observations, or Patricia offered her helpful suggestions, Oliver would look at his wine glass or turn to another conversation. He was choosing, each time, the path of least friction, and the path of least friction consistently ran through me. He started asking me to manage myself in ways that accommodated his world. He asked me to consider my wardrobe before certain events. He asked me to be careful about mentioning my work to people who might not find it impressive. He asked me once whether I might think about taking a different role, something more visible, something that would contribute better to the impression they were trying to make collectively. I said, "The impression we are trying to make." He said, "You know what I mean." I did know. The impression was not a shared construction. It was his. I was being asked to be a better supporting element. I tolerated this for the same reason I had tolerated everything else, because I was watching, because I had decided at the beginning that I would let the situation develop fully and honestly before I acted, and the acting would be decisive when it came. Vivienne Cartwright entered Oliver's life in the 4th year of our marriage. She was the daughter of a property developer whose empire was 3 times the size of the Ashworth, and she had been introduced to Oliver through Patricia, who had arranged the introduction with the specific intentionality of a woman making a strategic placement, and who described it to me afterward as just a networking dinner. I am sure you understand. I understood precisely. Vivienne Cartwright was 31, very blonde, very polished, and very clearly in the market for exactly what Oliver had and what Oliver's orbit represented. She attended 4 events in 2 months. She laughed at Oliver's observations with a focus that went slightly beyond professional friendliness. She wore dresses that had price tags that announced themselves to anyone who had learned to read the code. I watched all of it. I watched Oliver's posture change in her presence. I watched him become, in those months, someone who was auditioning for a different version of his life, a version where the woman beside him matched the world he had built better than I did, or better than he had come to believe I did. On a Tuesday morning in February, he called and asked if I could come to his solicitor's office at noon. He said there was something we needed to discuss. The solicitor's office was in the city, on the 14th floor of a glass building with a view of the Thames. The conference room was pale and functional, a glass table, black leather chairs, the kind of room that is designed for transactions rather than conversation. Oliver was already there when I arrived. Beside him was his solicitor. Across the table, 2 copies of a document were laid out with the precision of someone who had anticipated this meeting for some time. Oliver looked at my coat. I was wearing a wool coat, charcoal gray, that I had bought the previous winter on sale because it was good quality and fitted well and cost what I could justify on an archivist's salary. Oliver had seen me wear it dozens of times. On this occasion, he looked at it as if seeing it for the first time and finding it inadequate. "Thank you for coming," he said. I looked at the documents. "What are we doing?" "I think you know," he said. I waited. "I have been unhappy for some time," he said. "I think you have been unhappy too. I think this has not been working for a while, and I think the honest thing is to address it rather than continue." He said all of this with the careful delivery of someone who has rehearsed it. Vivienne and I have become close. I want to be able to pursue that without complication. "Without the complication of your wife," I said. "I would not put it that way." "How would you put it?" He was quiet. Then he said, "Ellie, you are a good person, but you do not fit the life I am building. You never really did. You have no money, no background, no family that amounts to anything." I was naive about how much that would matter. "I am trying to be honest with you now, rather than dragging this out." The solicitor produced a pen. He slid it toward me. "The settlement is fair," Oliver said. "You will have 6 months of rent covered and a reasonable sum to establish yourself. Given that you came into this marriage with nothing, I think that is generous." I looked at him. I looked at the documents. I looked at the pen. And I thought, 5 years. 5 years of choosing the sail rack and the tube and the small office in Clerkenwell. 5 years of cooking dinners and building something that he had just described as naive. I picked up the pen. I signed both copies. I set the pen down. I stood up. I put my coat on. I picked up my bag. Oliver looked slightly surprised. He had expected something, an argument, tears, the scene that would allow him to position himself as the reasonable party. I said, "Goodbye, Oliver." I walked out. The rain had started by the time I reached street level. I walked through it. I did not look for a taxi. I walked for 40 minutes through the February rain because I needed the cold and the movement and the clarity that comes from being in weather that does not care about your circumstances. When I reached the flat, I called my father. He answered before the second ring. I said, "It is done." He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I am very clear." He said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need to come home, but first, I need one thing from you." He listened. When I had finished explaining, he was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "The yacht will be in position in 3 weeks." I said, "Good. The timing will need to be precise," he said. "I know the date," I said. "Patricia Ashworth announced it at a lunch last month. The engagement party is on the 19th at Port Meridian." He said, "I will arrange it." I said, "Papa." He said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you for waiting." He said, "I was always going to wait. As long as you needed. That is what fathers do." 11 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon in May, the Royal Sovereign Yacht Aldrich entered the harbor at Port Meridian. From the dock, Oliver and his 200 guests watched the gangway descend. The naval escorts had taken positions flanking the yacht. On the dock, the 6 members of the Royal Protection Service stood at the perimeter they had established while the party was distracted by the approach. I appeared at the top of the gangway. The dress was ivory silk, floor length, with a structured bodice and a train that moved in the harbor wind. I had chosen it from the Sorvain Royal Wardrobe with specific intention, understated enough to allow the jewelry to speak, formal enough to establish the occasion. The jewelry was the Sorvain Constellation Parure, a complete set of diamonds and sapphires that had been assembled for my grandmother's coronation in 1962 and had been worn on state occasions by the women of the Sorvain royal family since. The necklace alone was a graduated cascade of diamonds and sapphires, the center stone 42 carats, mounted in platinum, the earrings, the bracelet, the tiara, which I wore without apology, the diamonds catching the afternoon harbor light and returning it amplified. My father walked beside me. He was wearing the formal dress uniform of the King of Sorvain, midnight blue, gold braided, the orders and decorations of 40 years of sovereignty on his chest. He was 70 years old and moved like a man of 50 who had never once doubted his direction. We descended the gangway. My father offered his arm. I took it. We walked onto the dock of the Port Meridian Yacht Club. 200 people watched us walk. The silence had replaced the jazz quartet. The champagne flutes had been lowered. Oliver was standing approximately 20 meters away, and his face was doing something complicated. The rapid renegotiation of a person who has just understood that they have made a structural error, that the thing they thought they knew was not the thing, that the woman they sent home in the rain was not the woman they thought they had sent home. My father stopped in the center of the dock. He looked at the assembled guests. He had the voice of a man who had addressed parliaments and summit gatherings and the crowds of a nation, and it required no amplification in the harbor air. "My name is Edward III, King of Sorvain," he said. "The woman beside me is my daughter, Her Royal Highness Crown, Princess Eleonora of Sorvain, heir to the throne and to the sovereign trust of the Kingdom of Sorvain, which currently manages assets valued at approximately 290 billion euros. He paused. The pause was precisely long enough for the mathematics to reach every person on the dock. "My daughter was married to Mr. Oliver Ashworth for 5 years," my father continued. "She chose to live privately during that marriage, as was her right. She has recently chosen to end that privacy." He looked at Oliver directly. "Mr. Ashworth, the Sorvain Sovereign Wealth Fund has, since your company's Series B capital raised 3 years ago, held an indirect position in the Ashworth Development Group through a Luxembourg holding vehicle called Northern Capital Partners. That position represents 23% of your company's capitalization. As of this morning, that position has been liquidated. Oliver's face went white. The proceeds of the liquidation have been redeployed to a Sorvain charitable education foundation, my father said. The transaction was executed at market open this morning, before the exchange processed the day's volume. Your company's share price will reflect the change when the market reopens on Monday. I expect the movement will be significant. A man near the back of the crowd, I recognized him as one of Oliver's major private investors. A man named Hartley, who had been at 2 of the company's fundraising dinners, had taken out his phone. He was looking at it with the expression of someone reading something they do not want to be reading. Hartley turned to the man beside him and said something I could not hear from where I was standing. The man beside him also took out his phone. Additionally, my father said, the Sorvain Royal Planning Authority has reviewed the permits associated with Ashworth Development's City project, the mixed-use development that was the company's primary current asset. 3 of the permits involve variances that were submitted for approval to regulatory bodies that receive funding from the Sorvain International Urban Development Fund. Those variances are under review, pending a compliance audit. The audit will take approximately 8 months. Hartley had turned away from the crowd and was speaking rapidly into his phone. 3 other guests followed, then 2 more. The specific sound of an engagement party discovering that the financial infrastructure of its host has just been revised is quiet at first. A series of phone screens illuminating, a series of murmured conversations, a series of polite departures that are not polite in their substance. Then it becomes less quiet as the scale of what is happening clarifies. Oliver was looking at me. He had been looking at me since we had walked down the gangway. His expression had passed through shock and fear and was now somewhere in the territory of the specific devastation of a man who understands with complete precision what he lost and what that loss is going to cost him. Vivian Cartwright was standing beside him. She was still in her white dress. Valentino, I had noted, the kind of dress that announces its own cost. And she was also looking at her phone, and the expression on her face was the expression of someone recalculating. Oliver took a step toward me. Eleonora, my real name. He had never said it before. Please, if I had known, if I had understood what, we could have had something that, you had it, I said, for 5 years. He looked at me as if he were going to say something else. Several things competed on his face. None of them resolved into words. You told me, I said quietly, that I had no money, no background, and no family that amounted to anything. You were incorrect about all 3, but you did not need correct information to treat me with respect. You needed only to decide that I was worth it. You decided I was not. I am satisfied that I have complete information now. I turned to my father. He offered his arm. I took it. We walked back along the dock, between the members of the Royal Protection Service who had maintained their perimeter, past the guests who had not yet left and who were standing in the particular stillness of people who have witnessed something they will discuss for a very long time. We walked up the gangway. We did not look back. On the deck of the Aldrich, my father stood beside me as the yacht began its departure from the Port Meridian harbor. The harbor receded. The dock, with its banner and its remaining guests, and Oliver Ashworth standing at the edge of the water watching us go, became smaller. I watched it until it was too small to read the expressions on the faces. Then I turned toward the sea. The financial consequences were, by the following week, a matter of record. Northern Capital's liquidation of its 23% stake in the Ashworth Development Group triggered a covenant review on the company's primary debt facility, which was, by its terms, secured against the company's overall capitalization. The Monday market open saw the stock decline 31% as the liquidation's volume processed. Two of Oliver's private investors activated their protective clauses and withdrew their capital commitment. Hartley's fund issued a formal withdrawal notice by Thursday. The city development project's permit review delayed the start of construction by 8 months, during which time the construction contracts lapsed and had to be renegotiated at significantly worse terms. The project's projected return was revised downward twice in 3 months. By the end of the summer, Oliver Ashworth had sold a 40% stake in the company to a private equity buyer who had offered a price that reflected the distressed circumstances rather than the company's optimistic projections from the previous year. The Ashworth Development Group, which had been the primary engine of the family's wealth for 30 years, was no longer a family business. Vivian Cartwright, I was told by people who tracked such things, had ended the engagement by late summer. She had been interested in the developer of a major city scheme with strong projected returns. She was not interested in the distressed seller of a controlling stake at unfavorable terms. I am back in Sorvain. I have been here for 4 months. The work was waiting. It is always waiting. And I have returned to it with something I did not have before I left. A specific and complete understanding of what I am willing to accept from the world and what I am not. I spent 5 years as Ellie Marsh. I wore the wool coat and took the tube and cataloged correspondence and cooked dinner on Tuesdays. And I was real in every moment of it. None of it was performance. The archival work I did at the Institute was genuine, and I was good at it, and I valued it. Oliver looked at all of it and saw poverty. He saw absence of money, of connection, of usefulness to his ambitions. He saw a woman with nothing to offer and made his calculation accordingly. He was wrong about the money. He was wrong about the connection. He was wrong about every material fact he thought he had. But even if he had been right, even if Ellie Marsh had been exactly what she appeared to be, he would still have been wrong to treat her the way he did. That is the thing he will never understand, because understanding it would require him to see people as having value independent of their utility. And that is a form of vision he does not have. Real power does not perform itself. It does not walk into rooms announcing its nature. It wears wool coats and takes the tube and does its work, and it watches, and it learns, and it waits. And when the moment comes, when the shadow falls across the harbor and the gangway descends and 200 people look up from their champagne flutes, it arrives fully, finally, without apology. I did not look back from the deck of the Aldrich, not because I was cold, but because there was nothing behind me worth seeing. The thing worth seeing was ahead, the open sea and the coast of Sorvain, and the work that was waiting. So tell me, did you see it? The moment the yacht's shadow fell across the engagement party, and Oliver Ashworth understood that the woman he had sent home in the rain, in a wool coat, was standing on the deck of a sovereign vessel in a diamond tiara, did the financial destruction that followed, precise, complete, delivered with the calm authority of a king who had been patient for 5 years, feel like exactly what it was? If this story of invisible power, deliberate patience, and the kind of return that no one saw coming made you believe that karma operates on a timeline of its own choosing, smash that like button, share this with everyone who has ever been dismissed by someone who did not understand what they were looking at, and subscribe so you never miss a story of crowns, consequences, and the devastating elegance of a woman who simply sailed home.